Yes, interesting. On that point, we found that the average lunch break was actually split between those that took the 7 to 10 minutes, which was very much the how long did it take to get from my desk to grab a sandwich and back again, and then those that actually go and eat in the staff restaurant and canteen, who take more like 42, 43 minutes. So I don't know if that's better or worse, but I think there are different ways of doing it. As you said, what better subject to finish off just before lunch with? I hope you've been thinking about what you've been eating today. The activities we do throughout every day, whether we're in the office, whether we're visiting clients, whether we're sitting here listening to some fascinating presentations. The food and drink that we eat and when we do that is really, really important in terms of keeping up our energy levels, in terms of our ability to concentrate, our ability to think creatively. And this is something that we've been thinking about for a long, long time, and in conversations with Barry at Zurich Insurance Group, we decided to really dig deep into what is actually going on and with food at work, why it's so bad at the moment, and what we can do, what factors we can bring to help it change in the future. Of course, the first officers. There we are. Were the coffee house. Lloyd's Coffee House in the city, similar coffee houses in Istanbul, or as it was, Constantinople and New York, which were really the first places that groups of people came together to collaborate together, to work together, to share information, and they had things like displayed knowledge. They had the food and drink that actually brought people together and helped the collaboration and the knowledge flow happen. And one of the things that we thought about is really what was the first office, the coffee houses. The new office, is that the Starbucks, the Cafe Neros, or the Look Mum No Hands of these worlds? And then co-working, are they the new coffee houses? And then also, how can we bring in those elements of flexibility and good coffee and tea into the workplace, perhaps without the house of the coffee house? And yet, if you look at most offices around the world, the canteen will look very much like this, which I think is really reminiscent of those horrible school canteens that we all used to hate when we were younger. And the fare that is served in them and eaten in them is often not much better, either in terms of taste or actually in terms of its nutritional quality, freshness, and how healthy it is for you. And yet, although food services in offices look very much like this still, offices around the world are beginning to embrace a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the years here at Worktech, and obviously this morning as well. The office world is beginning to change. We're beginning to think of the office in terms of the activities we do in it, the settings that we need for those. And that's been driven by a huge number of things, property price, but also by technology, things like the cloud, things like mobile devices, the things we're all using to do our work. And also the nature of our work is changing to more knowledge-based environments. And our ability to collaborate is changing. And of course, this is really driving change in the workplace. And yet we asked ourselves, why, if the workplace are changing, do you still have canteens in offices that look very, very similar to what they always have done? There's also been a profound change in our personal attitudes towards food. Around the world, we found that actually people had been becoming much more interested in the food they're eating. The rise of the celebrity and television chef is only one facet of this. But we are taking much more of an interest in the food we're buying, be it the organic food revolution, some might say, fad might say, but or be it superfoods. We're all actually thinking when we go to those supermarkets and when we eat at home, when we cook for our families and our friends, we're all thinking much, much more carefully about what we're putting into our mouths and through our digestive tracts. And yet again, food at work still looks like this. The model that most companies still use for food at work is very, very linear, very hierarchical. And it's very much based on how many people do I have in this building, therefore how many people do I have to feed, which is usually about 40-50% of the number of people in the building, depending on whether you're in a city centre or on a campus out of town. And if you've got very few people, you have a kitchenette. You get then vending machines for more people. You get a coffee cart for more people. You get a cafe, a self-service cafe, a served cafe, and then a full restaurant if you've got about 1,000 people plus in your building. But that's a one-size-fits-all model. That says that if you're in an office of 10 people, the best you can do for food at work is is a mini kitchen with a kettle and perhaps a microwave if you're really lucky. And yet, if you're a 1,000-person office, no one wants to eat in it or drink in that little cafe. Everyone wants to go to that massive space on the 5th floor where it's just open and singular, and there's only one environment to eat in. And those environments only get used between 12 and 2. We felt there had to be a better way. And luckily, through the interviews we interviewed around 100 organisations. We found that there is. We embarked on a year-long project with Barry and his team at Zurich. And this is just a tiny selection of the corporates we interviewed. And then we also interviewed a lot of other interesting players, everything from high street food chains to designers and architects of office spaces, of restaurant spaces, to food consultancies, to artists, food artists, and nutritionists and so on. We also, and the subject of food is very close, I think, to all of our hearts. We had some fantastic dinners where we brought together people over beautiful food to actually discuss what the future was for this area. One of the things that we started off with, and we looked at everything from the culture and history of food at work, through to nutrition, through to the spaces we eat and drink in, the spaces we work in, things like plate sizes and how that impacts how much you eat and drink. We started with culture and we started with language. Do any of you know what these two words have to do with food? Salary and company. At the back.
I know the company comes from companis, means breaking bread with.
Yes, it comes exactly from the Latin for those with whom you break bread, through the sort of medieval French military into the company that we have today. Salary actually comes from the Latin sal, which is salt, and the Romans used to pay their army with salt. And so the very language that we use when we come to talk about work and workplace and where we work and who we work for is very much intricately bound with the language we use for food. And yet we don't really always realise it. Through all the interviews, all the research we did, we collected a lot of data from a lot of corporates globally, and we ran a design competition. We did a huge number of activities. We really condensed our findings. We were looking for innovation in almost every aspect. We condensed our findings into what we call the 7 Ps of food at work. Nicely illustrated with actual Ps, would you believe it? At the heart of which is people. We've heard, this morning we've heard at Worktech across the years that workplace is really about people. It should be driven by people, what they need, who they are, and what they do. And food at work is no different. Partnerships, place, products, physiology, performance, and productivity surrounds those, and I'll cover all of these very briefly now. After which, please do get your thinking caps on because Barry's here and I'll be asking him some questions. But if you do have questions, we'd love to take those from you as well. The people you have that come into your office that need feeding every day. We often think about food at work, I think typically now, as being something along the lines of just fueling them. They burn somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 calories a day if they're relatively active. We are getting them in this building for between 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock at night. Therefore, some of that 2,000 calories has to be put into them during the time that they're at our work. But that's not a very healthy way of thinking about it. We looked around the world at very different attitudes geographically and culturally, and where the different clusters were globally as to different attitudes to food at work. We came up with this idea of global food cities, where you have food cultures which are very native to different regions, and yet in certain cities which are really international, you actually have a very, very similar attitude to food at work. And then you've also got to consider that people of different ages and different backgrounds want to eat and drink in different ways. Some are very much used to the whole idea of eating at your desk, eating alone, or eating a big meal at lunchtime. Others, perhaps younger, are more likely to want to graze, to want to eat constantly throughout the day, and may not take that sort of hour or that break for lunch. And we thought it was interesting, going back to the linguistics of it, that the word lunch break in actually most European and a lot of other languages around the world involves the word break. You stop for lunch. You don't work at lunchtime. And it's the same with breakout spaces. It's this concept that if you're not at your desk, you're not working. And we wanted to challenge that partly with our report. In terms of places, we looked firstly at places we choose to eat outside of work. And the range of these spaces, through restaurants, through home, through grab and go places on the street, are so varied and have such different atmospheres. And yet we choose very, very every time we want to go to a restaurant and want to grab a sandwich or grab a snack or grab a coffee, we choose where we go based on the environment that it gives us, based on the cost and the quality and the freshness of the food we're about to get, and based on the activity that we want to do in there, and based on our mood as well, what side of the bed we've woken up in that morning. We make all of these choices every time we want to grab some food or cook for our family, and we choose the places to go for that. And yet, you only have one choice, typically, at work for the place you eat food in. We tracked a lot of innovation globally in terms of the places that food are now beginning to be provided in offices for food, typically offices that have embraced elements of agile working, of activity-based working. And again, there's just a huge number of different environments which support different activities. You've got some which are noisy, some which are bustling, some which are very quiet, some which are very much more social, some which you bring your technology to, your laptops and your tablets, and they're enabled with Wi-Fi to, and others which are very much not technology enabled, others which are very much designed to be a break, a 5, 10, 20-minute hour break away from the everyday work that we do in the offices and the buildings that we do it in. Some of these are designed for people to stay out for a long period of time. Others are designed to get people through and out as quickly as possible. So it's not just about the people you have, but it's also about how quickly you want them through, what they're doing, and giving them a choice, really, was what it boiled down to. The choice of the environment, the choice of the time they're spending there, the choice of the pause time, as it were, in these different environments. And a huge variety of different spaces, a lot of which are detailed in the report, which will be published in the coming weeks. So please do have a look at that when it is published. And everything from some very architectural spaces to spaces like this, the hub in London, in the West End, which are very much sort of bring your own furniture almost. It's very, very sort of thrown together, to this web TV space in Turkey, which is, again, highly stylized. The product that people eat in these spaces is incredibly important. We're much more interested, as I said, in the products that we're eating and drinking at the moment. And that's been a revolution in our private lives in the last 10, 20 years. It is actually a global and not just a Western industrialized trend as well. The products that a lot of workplaces, a lot of corporate workplaces put into their food tends to be not, should we say, right at the top end of freshness and quality. Not necessarily at the bottom end either, but we looked at a lot of companies that were beginning really to think about how do you not only make sure the product you're putting into your food spaces is much better, but also how do you inform and engage your staff with that? How do you make sure they know and they make the right choices and they're informed to make those choices as they go through the space? And things like sustainability, things like introducing new foods, things like around exciting and engaging your staff through food were very much at the forefront of our findings in the report, led by all sorts of different organisations. Physiology. Again, we've just heard about the importance of standing up, the importance of movement. We're all used to this sort of evolution that we've seen, and that really has a huge impact on our ability to concentrate, our ability to be energetic at work, our ability to be creative. But despite all that, the food that we eat and drink at work can actually help counter that. And if we did things like standing up, as well as eating better, both in terms of the food and when and where and how, we can actually combat that and increase the productivity massively. And then, of course, there's this trend of obesity, the global epidemic, and we wanted to try and understand what companies can do, what perhaps they should do in terms of trying to combat this obesity through education, through the types of food they provide, but also what benefits that has for them. What benefits in terms of smaller number of people in their organisation being obese, and therefore increased productivity rates and energy rates in the office. Performance was very close to the hearts of a lot of the organisations we spoke to in terms of driving that performance and productivity. And we came up with 5 different profiles of people that we watched a lot of people eating, not in a creepy way, but we watched a lot of people eating. We talked to a lot of people about how people eat and drink in their workspace, and we came up with these 5 profiles based on the types of spaces that people want to go and eat in, and how they want to eat, and when they want to eat, and how long they want to take to do that. In reality, we as individuals we contain all 5 of these profiles, but in different proportions. There's the coffee connector, who is driven by that need to meet and greet people through the coffee. The coffee and the tea and the caffeine really is the driver of that burst of energy, that burst of concentration. The socializers of this world, who see food and drink as a very, very social. It's not about work. It's about talking to people, getting to know people. And sharing both the food and ideas and knowledge and thoughts through that. They're the al desco diners of this world, who will run down in 6 minutes to grab a sandwich and run back, or possibly more creatively, cook a chicken for themselves. There are times when we all need to do this. There are times when we're under such pressure, we've got such deliverables to create in such a short period of time that we need to do this. But then there are some people that do that naturally because of the type of person they are. There are the power lunchers, who very much see eating as something that it should take work to the next level. It's something that you do work through. You don't break, you don't stop. But actually, it's a different form of working and a different form of using food and different environment to do that. And then, of course, there are the corporate athletes. These are the people that are incredibly engaged with nutrition, incredibly engaged with exercise, incredibly engaged with balancing everything in their lives, standing up, sitting down, what they eat, when they eat, how they eat, and when they exercise to complement that. And the last P, the second last P rather, is productivity. We're all trying desperately to measure that holy grail of productivity. How do we get there? How do we prove that eating good food and being nutritionally aware, how do we prove that is actually related to business and team and individual productivity? Was something we wanted really to get to the bottom with this report. The final P is partnership. Many of the corporates we spoke to operate the same standard model of having a partnership with a sort of corporate food service provider, be that one of the big ones, one of the smaller ones. But it's very much, here you are, we give you X amount of square foot of usually free space in our office. You go away, you fill it with the kitchen, you fill it with tables, and feed our staff once a day. We looked at different ways of modelling that, different ways that corporates could engage with not only standard food service providers, but also potentially some other new players, and how you can mix and match to create variety and difference in the types of food that we provide. How you can provide things like pop-ups in your office, pop-up food spaces alongside your staff canteen, your staff restaurant. Really what we were searching for, and I think what we found in the end, was a lot of innovation in small pockets. And we want, through this report and through everyone reading this report, to try and bring some of that innovation to their workspaces. So I'm going to let Barry introduce himself quickly, and then I've got some questions for Barry, but please feel free to stick your hands up if you have any questions about the report, about food at work, or want to know anything more.
Thanks, Luke. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Barry Varcoe, Global Head of Real Estate for Zurich Insurance. And we were keen with working on with UnWork on this, because we saw food as really an untapped resource in terms of our workplace. We have the philosophy that our job is about supporting our 55,000 colleagues primarily, and the 15,000 or other people and folk that come to our offices every day. And when we look at it from that point of view, as opposed to a building-centric point of view, you sort of look at what's important to those people. And food, obviously, is rather a fundamental basic need for everyone. And we weren't really giving it much thought. And we looked around and realised that apart from the pockets of excellence, most people weren't giving it really much thought, which is why we asked UnWork to work with us on this research. So that's the context as to why Zurich Insurance was really interested in learning a lot more about this. And obviously for us, the next stage is to take these learnings and to deploy it as quickly as possible in whatever ways we can throughout our portfolio.
Fantastic. Food is a very personal subject, so I thought I'd start off, Barry, by asking, when you first entered the workplace, what was the typical food provision?
Well, actually, I started working on construction sites as a trainee surveyor, which is probably the worst of examples because it was a porter cabin kitchen and it was pie chips and, in fact, mushy peas, where you certainly couldn't identify 7 separate peas. And I think that's where I started. If it wasn't that, and I was back in the office, it was the subway dash of the Aldesco diner, quickly out, back in, and carry on working. So that's where I started with food.
And has it changed? Have you seen it change significantly at all?
Certainly I still do too much Aldesco dining. The diary is so compressed these days that you know, you're forced into that, and I think one of the big learnings for me personally out of this work is to use and consciously use all 5 of those options and almost to diarise them and to try and creatively use it as part of the working day, and also to think about my own personal needs, look at what I'm doing either side of the sort of the lunchtime break if I want to structure the day that way. And say, well, do I, given the intensity either side of it, do I actually need that gap to be, particularly in the afternoon, more productive? And certainly as I've sort of gone the wrong side of 50, I find my metabolism's changed quite a lot. And if I have too much at lunch for whatever reason, then I know there's a 1 hour or 1.5 hour period, which actually kicks off for me about half an hour after I've finished eating, where I sort of really notice a big dip in my ability to concentrate. So I do think I have to start really proactively looking at this in a more intelligent way for a number of reasons.
We actually looked at some of the science around caffeine intake, and we found that you know, obviously caffeine gives you a spike in your ability to concentrate and your energy levels, but it doesn't last very long. But actually one of the healthiest times of the day for you to drink a cup of tea or a cup of coffee is about half an hour to 45 minutes after you've eaten lunch, because it counteracts the natural dip in your energy levels just as you start digesting. One of the things we asked a lot of the companies that we interviewed was about, you know, food strategy, and this idea of having a global food strategy. How do you make sure that your employees get a very similar experience, albeit, you know, nuanced culturally depending on the geography you're in, wherever you go? So how does this food strategy and this global food strategy fit together? And many of the companies we interviewed said that they didn't have a global food strategy. It was very much, you know, driven by local officers, local needs, and local regulations as well. In terms of creating a global strategy, Barry, and bringing all these strands together, do you think a lot of companies are thinking about nutrition and what they should be doing in terms of food at work to encourage, to enhance productivity and to encourage innovation?
I think certainly some companies are thinking about nutrition and doing things the right way, but a lot aren't. Certainly, again, we've learned a lot through this exercise and are now going to take this forward. But I think in terms of sort of global strategies to food, there's a lot more that can be done. One of the philosophies, I guess, that we've embraced is that in this sort of variable world that we're all in with so much change and choice for everyone, you've actually got to start thinking about the office in one respect as a hotel would, which is you've got to try and attract people in. So it's all very well and good Yahoo saying, well, you've got to go to work, but that's forcing people. It's much better, actually, if the office is somewhere they actually want to go, because it's a great place to be. And a key part of that can be the food. When you sort of think about away from work, what you do when you eat, it's in a variety of settings, and a lot of those will be a sort of a social, there's a very strong social aspect to it. So what better way of helping build the sort of the communal strength and the cultural identity of an organisation than through food? Because it's a natural thing to bring people together. So certainly part of our strategy going forward is now how can we make the most of that? Also in terms of, you know, Zurich as an organisation, so obviously like a lot of organisations, it's pretty international. And food, I think, is somewhere where you can both sort of celebrate consistency, but also celebrate the diversity. So one of the ideas we want to sort of flow through is what can we do, first of all, through our food offering that brings the organisation together? So one way might be to have a consistent brand, an internal brand that's ours for food. And in fact, in a previous organisation that I worked for, we did that. We tied it to the year that the organisation got its Royal Charter, and that became the brand, and we sort of took an image of the seal the King of the day gave, and it worked really well. So rather than having, you know, Aramark, Sodexo or Compass on the on all the paraphernalia that you get with food, such as your napkins and what goes behind the server and so on and so forth. We had this brand in every country. And that worked really, really well. So we'll be thinking through for Zurich, how can we do the same thing? But similarly, you then need variety. So the variety can be in the food offerings, obviously, that you provide in each country. And then perhaps you can go one step further and say, well, why not celebrate that diversity all around the world and take perhaps the food offering from one country per week and feature that, one or two items in every restaurant or canteen or place that you deliver food all around the world, and perhaps put a poster up explaining to the people all around the world what goes on in our business in those countries. So you're helping then starting to build again this community through food, and you can use it in a way to really sort of leverage what the organisation's about and try and build the bonds that tie us together.
I think one of the things that we wanted to try and understand in the report was, given that the level of knowledge out there as to the impact that what we eat and drink has on our ability to work and our ability to be productive. Why haven't companies, large organisations particularly, why haven't they thought about this more? Why hasn't there been more innovation to date? And I don't know if you have a particular take on that, Barry.
I think with everything else that's going on, it's an easy thing to overlook, especially when you look at where sort of food in the workplace has come from. And the way in which a lot of us have been brought up and trained. Even if you look at things like Lean and Six Sigma and all the rest of it, it's about efficiency more than effectiveness. And when you sort of take the production sort of aspect of society and business, you look at the canteen, quite often it actually sort of kicked off. You can go back to factories and production cycles, and in fact it was inefficient to have people drift out into the canteen. So that's where you get the lunch break from, in terms of you shut the production line down, everyone goes into the canteen, gets the food, gets back, switch everything on again, because obviously if you've got people leaving part way through in dribs and drabs, it just wrecks the efficiency of the production line. And similarly, the sort of the food is becoming efficient refueling. And I think this is the sort of stuff where we've sort of just lacked imagination. I can take that as far even when you start designing the building. What we've learned from this and are now changing the way we do things is one of the first things we think about in terms of the layout of our campuses, buildings, at whatever level you want to think about it, is where does the food go? And that's not just in a singular aspect, but how are we going to spread it throughout the building? Because the food is going to be a key driver in terms of people flows. And if you can use the food as the sort of the nexus points or nodes which are going to attract people, that can be almost like the sort of the roundabouts in a city in terms of the arteries and the roads. It's where people will come together. In particular, it's been a massive shift of attitude with designing our new corporate headquarters. And we've spent more time worrying about the food offering and where they're going to be and what we want people to feel about those different offerings than much else in the early stages of design. So we're sort of almost building the thing from the inside out in that respect. But it's been food that's been the driver really for that.
I think some of that change in the way you're now starting to think about food, and I think some of the change we've seen in a lot of other organisations, is that you stop thinking of your employees as a captive audience when it comes to food. And you stop thinking, okay, we've got 1,000 people in this building, therefore 450, give or take, are going to stay in this building for lunch, and the rest are either going to bring it themselves or go downstairs to grab a sandwich from the shopping mall. And I think what we found was that companies were stopping thinking of their employees as a captive audience and starting to think, how can we entice people to eat the food that we are providing? How can we entice people to eat in the environments we're providing for them to do that? Instead of just saying, okay, we're going to provide a big open space where people are just going to have to come and they're going to have to eat the food that we've given them, and they're just going to have to like it or lump it or pop down to Pret or Starbucks outside. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Yes, at the back. Mark, I think.
Yeah. Is it good to have food free? I know one tech company that talks about the half a stone within 6 months of joining because all the food is for free. Is that a good thing?
There are not many people looking at providing food free. Google, who I think you're referring to, they are in all aspects of work and workplace, and their whole organisation are very big data collectors, and they are convinced that they can show the business case and the return on investment for that free food. And it is a similar kind of thing, I think, for a lot of the tech companies in Silicon Valley. The other side of that is that a lot of organisations around the world are continuing to cut subsidy. They're saying, well, look, people are gonna have to pay for their food, either buying it in the supermarket to bring it in, or they're gonna have to pay for it by popping down to the local cafe, the local sandwich shop. Why are we subsidising it? There's not a drive at the moment that we saw, certainly, to provide more in the way of heavily subsidised or free food. But to counteract that, it's how do you give the return on investment, as it were, for the individual? How do you say, well, this is going to cost you a little bit more. We're going to make sure that it is below the price you'll find outside the office, but also the freshness and the quality and the environment of the food and the environment you eat it in are going to make up for any cost any money that you spend. And I think we found globally that people respond to that. They know that they've got to pay for good food, and I think there's an understanding of that. Obviously, it's a different story for call centres versus headquarters in Canary Wharf or Singapore. It really matches the type of people you have and the environment and the space that you're in and the culture as well. But there's very little drive outside of Silicon Valley that we saw to really provide free food.
I think the key on that one is just to make sure that it fits with the overall proposition to your staff, and it needs to be consistent. The proposition to staff covers a wide range of things: salary, health benefits, all sorts of stuff. The main thing, I think, is that it's consistent and it fits with what you're doing, and you've given it forethought, and it's not just a sort of a throwaway thing, or it's a historic thing where you've always done 30% subsidy, and whatever it is, that's what it's going to be.
Yes, in the middle.
Hi, John Symes from JLL. In workplace inquiries, it almost is a norm that you'll find that food and beverages are, right at the top of people's concerns, and yet it's so personal and so important. Yet companies don't pay very much attention to it, and you've highlighted that. But what's your view on eating at desk, and in particular, smelly foods, which might disturb others? Is it a question of having etiquettes and protocols in place to force them not to do that, or is it opportunities to eat elsewhere? What's the push-pull balance?
I think our experience is it's both. I think you need to you need to request people that they don't eat sort of pungent food at their desk, because it seriously disrupts others. And it should become sort of a social anathema to do it. But at the same time, you've got to give them the option of where else they can go and eat that food if that's what they want and get it. So I think it's a sort of almost a social etiquette that you've got to build up there, and the biggest pressure that will drive correct behaviour is the peer pressure. And that's what you've got to encourage. You've almost got to have it as a self-regulating culture to some extent. But if you're going to go over to that type of sort of new, more flowing environment where there is that sort of choice, you've got to expect that there will be some misbehaviour. So you've got to put in place the sort of the encouragement to move it in the right direction. And most people will abide by it. Perhaps the most powerful way for a persistent offender is to do the same thing to them. Go and sit opposite them and make something particularly noxious and munch away and wait for them to complain. And then you say, "Glad you've got the point."
I think a lot of it's around availability, and we find this in general workplace as well. If the space is nearby, if there are spaces nearby that are available that enable a different activity, be it in this case eating food, be it having a quick meeting, quick catch up, people will choose to use that, and it doesn't take much of a push in terms of top down behavioural etiquette. Really, once you provide that choice in those spaces that are near to people, and I think that's the key, they will go and use them. And I think a lot of from the interviews we did, a lot of what we found was that for companies where there was just this one big canteen or restaurant space in a big office, that people felt they weren't allowed to eat their own food in that space, and the only other place they could eat their own food was at their desk, and that's partly what drove them to do it. I mean, there are times where we're all booking our next holiday at our desk, and so staying at our desk is important to us for that reason, but or just because we're so busy. But I think a lot of people who traditionally eat at their desk would not do so quite as often if they had other spaces to eat and drink in. There's a huge amount of science around hydration, and it's water's ability to help us think and to help us be creative. As much water as possible, I think, would be the would be the. Obviously, there are sustainability concerns around having things like bottled water, but a large number of organisations that we spoke to are moving towards sort of filtration systems that take normal tap water, as it were, normal mains water, and filter it in some way as well.
I think with water, as with a lot of different elements and components of the food and drink proposition, the best thing you can do is, first of all, give choice. Secondly, give education, or give people the ability to self-select, but based on knowledge, and to help them realise, if you like, the impact on the environment of different choices, and also the impact on themselves of different choices. So it comes into this whole sort of wellness sort of wider concept as well. You certainly don't want to be sort of overbearing in it and make people feel pressured in terms of what they should eat. But I think we're all grown up, we can make our own choices. But then the more information we can give around that in a sensible way, whether that be sort of generally on intranets or a point of sale, the better it will be. And we can then encourage people to do things which are perhaps better for them.
One thing we haven't mentioned in the last couple of minutes, only because there's so much in the report, it's difficult to cover everything, was this idea of different audiences for food at work. We're all starting to become aware, I think, that there are different audiences for your office, for your buildings, and for your workspace. So you've got your employees that come in every day, you've got employees visiting from other offices, you've got clients, you've got other types of visitors, you've got press, you might have investors, and so on. And we're beginning to provide those kind of visitor spaces and visitor experience spaces. We're beginning to allow people from outside the everyday organisation to come and work in our offices and in our spaces. But I think one of the trends we saw in the report is organisations beginning to think about the different audiences for food and how we can actually get visitors and clients and investors and people from other offices around the world to be able to come in and share the food spaces that we provide in our offices. And I wonder very quickly, Barry, if that's something that you and Zurich are looking into.
Yes, you've got to look at food in terms of all the different audiences and also all the different times of day. So long gone, I think, are the days where you can give up a last chunk of space to use just from sort of 11:30 in the morning till 1:30 in the afternoon. You've got to look at how the space can be used creatively throughout the whole day, and that can involve changing use as well. So you've got to be smart with your design and look for a variety of uses that it can support, and also a variety of different types of need and people. So why do you always have to take a customer, for example, into a posh meeting room when quite often they'd be more comfortable sat with you in a cafe type setting? So I think we've got to be a little bit smarter in terms of just realising that we're all individuals, we all have different needs and different wants at different times of the day in terms of what we're doing and so on and so forth, and that includes customers, it involves the other organisations we work with and people from there. They're not all identical either. So let's sort of mix it up a bit and be a bit smarter all round in terms of the variety and choice that we offer, and make it clear that as long as it's reasonable, anything that helps conducive engagement, work, whatever it might be that we're trying to achieve is okay. Break down some of these sort of myths and preconceived notions in terms of how we do things.
Fantastic. One final question I think we've got time for, if there are any from the audience. The report is being published in early December, but if you can't wait till then, please do come and talk to me or Barry or any of the UnWork team about our findings and how you can use food at work to drive productivity and innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.